Reflecting on the past few years, we can easily recognize the shattering of norms and the uncertainty really defining this era. And despite hopeful moments where it appears that things might be getting better, events like Ukraine, the conflict that popped up in 2022 shows up. And then we have to endure once-in-a-lifetime wildfires. We have floods, heat waves that are occurring at 2 or 3 times their typical duration. And look, I could go on and on and on and list out all the issues of things that we've all been witnessing over the last few years. But these events have really rekindled a sense of unpredictability and elevated our alertness and stress levels. And as a community, we've been learning to adapt by identifying potential threats and trying to craft plans to prepare for them. And however, in recent months, it's really underscored that change and our ability to adapt is really no longer an exception, but it is now the new norm. And I think it's time that we take a sobering look at what we're facing and take an honest assessment, really an inventory assessment, to see if we have what we need on our shelves in our own personal constitutions to meet our challenges. If you're new to this channel, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. Now, I typically do news segments on Tuesdays discussing the various issues that we're facing around the world, but today I decided to pull back and discuss a situation that I went through last weekend, and we'll tie all this together in this whole context of this conversation about unpredictability. Although this is not, again, our typical news segment, we'll still do a giveaway this week, which I'll discuss momentarily. Now, I purposely titled this video A Rapidly Changing World, and to me, it encapsulates what we're facing both now and in the future. And this recently became very real for me this last Friday. As many of you know, I live in Southern California. And by the way, thank you for those that reached out and, checking in. We had a hurricane that approached our area, which was downgraded to a tropical storm when it actually hit land. And the last hurricane to strike my area was in 1858. The previous significant tropical cyclone was in 1939. And the last hurricane to take a similar route was Hurricane Kathleen in 1976. Now, Friday morning, I was reading that a storm was heading our way, but admittedly, it just didn't register until later that evening that this was something more than just your typical storm. I think I saw reports about, tropical storm hurricane that were nearing the Baja Peninsula, and admittedly, in my mind, I just kind of skipped over. I was like, okay, whatever. I mean, the idea of a hurricane was so foreign to me because the area that I live in, we just don't see anything like this, an event of this magnitude come our way in a storm. And so when I get up Saturday morning, I began to take inventory. I reviewed my family's bug out gear in case we had to leave, in case we had flooding in our area. I went through and I changed out our water in our portable water containers. I started checking in on my neighbors to make sure they had what they needed. And my wife, she asked me if I was excited to be able to finally have the potential to finally use the preps that I've been getting ready. And I have to admit, I kind of was excited. And look, after I squared away my preps and I checked in on my neighbors, I went about the business of doing the boring stuff, like securing patio furniture, our trampoline, and all the other things, making sure drains were cleared and just making sure everything was ready for an incoming storm. And all that to say, it was a wake-up call. And that's really what I want to talk about here in this video. These events like this, they're rare, but they're beginning to happen with increasing frequency. And while these events are commonplace in some areas of the world, they're not where I live. City planners and architects who built the area that I live in, they didn't predict these kind of infrastructure issues that would need to endure these once per century events. And fortunately, the worst part of Hillary, it hit the coast and the deserts, and we received a good soaking in the swath of the area that I live in. I live between the coast and where, Palm Springs, I live somewhere in between. But still, we aren't well equipped for that much rain in such a small period. And to make matters worse, as residents of Ojai, they braced for Hurricane Hillary's impact, they were hit with a 5.1 earthquake, and that's an area that's a little north of LA. And it reminds you that we can prepare for one thing, but get another entirely. Some disasters, they contribute to other disasters, and that may be the case right now. And the worst heat wave, for example, of the year is currently building up across the South and Central United States. At the time in recording this video, it's bleeding into that. And it's going to last for the rest of this month in the form of a heat dome. And that's going to be a problem for people, but an even bigger problem for farmers and ranchers. Yes, we're still fortunate to produce an abundance compared to our consumption, but that's gradually changing. And it's essential to recognize that. We've been covering this in videos here recently on the channel. The really long arc of production is beginning to drop year after year. Across the United States, reports are indicating what we know already, that these heat waves are impacting crop production. One example that's notable is in Georgia, often called the peach state. They experienced a near complete loss of their peach crop due to a warm February and the subsequent late freezes in March. In Texas, their cotton plants shed their valuable fiber-containing bolls to endure hot nights. And while Kansas is expecting its smallest winter wheat harvest in over 20 years due to adverse conditions. And as I covered in other videos, many plants, they require a cooling temperature at night in what is called a diurnal temperature variation. They use this to set fruit and such. Agricultural output, it can be reduced or completely destroyed when that cannot occur. So farmers, they hope to harvest early if they can before the heat dome, or they hope that their crops will endure the prolonged heat. So the natural question that's going to come up in the comments section is, so what? We've had periodically various heat waves. We've had farmers that have always wrestled with the questions of what to plant and if and when they can or must harvest, and sometimes they have even suffered crop failures and herd losses. None of this is new. These heat domes, however, they've been observed more frequently and with greater intensity and duration. There is a continual chipping away at our food supply as they continue. And beyond just our food, infrastructure is also being pushed to the maximum of its design capability range, even beyond its original design parameters. We see this when the high winds stoked by these heat waves, with the storms, they can bring on the boundaries between the pressure systems, down power lines, and spark fires. And we see it when the sewer and the drainage systems become overwhelmed and our streets get flooded. We see this when power companies threaten rolling blackouts, warn of possible failures, or do fail. And look, I could list out a host of unique once per century problems, and we discuss many of them on this channel, but it comes to a point for me where I'm seeing so many of these once per century, once in a lifetime events happening once or twice per decade or even annually. And things are, as you could say, they're out of whack, and we must assess if our preps and preparedness are up to the task. The residents of Maui, they could have known that Hurricane Dora, passing far to the south of the island, would pull in devastating winds that could down power lines and result in a fire that cast so many in a desperate struggle to survive. And Dora's significance lies in its rare and extended path, starting in the Atlantic Ocean, crossing Central America into the Pacific Ocean, and then passing through 3 different regions of the Pacific and achieving the unique feat shared by only one other cyclone of maintaining hurricane-strength winds of up at least 74 miles per hour through all regions of the ocean. That's a bit of a mouthful, but I lay all that out because one weather anomaly, it can feed another. One once-in-a-century event spurns yet another. And we may see that with this epic heat dome as well. It will be one of the strongest and longest that we may have ever seen, the one that's playing out here in the Midwest. And in sitting down and preparing for this video, as I begin to look at all the different events that are playing out in the Atlantic right now, there's so many different storms that are, one time they were considered once in a lifetime weather events. They're starting to compound, they're feeding into each other. And as I said, I could go on naming and pointing out these events worldwide, but I honestly don't think we really have time for it in this video. Just as I woke up and felt the urge to prepare for the new challenge that was coming my way last Saturday, I think it's time we all inventory our preps and prepare as if the out of the ordinary may become more common than we would like. And let me pause and acknowledge that if we're just being honest here, the news, they need advertisers and viewers. So they're going to overhype and sensationalize every event they can. I get that. But you can't let that desensitize you to the bigger picture of what is happening here. Things are changing. And while that may seem rapid to people who study this and keep up on it, it seems gradual if you just merely move from headline to headline or just simply tune it out altogether. And the very nature of what we prepare for has to change along with the changes that we see in the world around us. But the good news, fortunately, reevaluating your preparedness does it force us to rethink and redesign the wheel entirely. Stored water is going to get you through various disasters, from a polluted municipal supply to a drought, hurricane, or even a burst pipe. Stored food is going to get you through everything from a martial law lockdown to an earthquake, a significant storm, or even a job loss. Backup power is going to get you through an electrical grid failure caused by sabotage, storms, or rolling blackouts. In many cases, you have most of what you need if you have carefully and thoughtfully prepared. You may only need to do as I did and look at what you have compared to the newest challenge on the horizon. And before we go on, I do want to announce this week's giveaway really quickly. This week, we're going to give away 2 Baofeng ham radios. And to be eligible for a chance to win, all you have to do is post a comment below and click the thumbs up icon. Next week, I'll announce a winner in our news segment. Now, the winner of the last video's giveaway of the Grizzly Gear emergency food rations is the subscriber Bearsy here. Congrats. I'll contact you shortly to get that sent out to you. Getting back to our discussion. If you take just one thing away from all this and the recent anomalies playing out in the world, let it be that weather, it has a profound impact on us in many ways, and we have to prepare for these anomalies impacting us, mainly because they're transitioning to be the new norm. Look, when I first got into preparedness, weather was an element, but my biggest factor starting out was earthquakes. But like many of us in our community, there was concerns I had about total grid collapses, all these things that, if I'm being honest, it sounds, like, okay, these are big issues that could happen. Kind of like, are we going to live in a Mad Max world one day? But when you begin to look at the practical and what's really beginning to play out more and more is weather, the impact that it has on our lives. We can look at other issues such as war, the impact that's having on our economy. I mean, all that to say, we could go on and on and on, but weather is one of those issues that is probably the most realistic scenario that's going to directly touch us and impact our lives. And just as you assess each disaster that could befall you in the present and the future, also look at the core elements of your preps. Do you have the on-hand resources to adapt and overcome the range of disasters that you could face? Do you have a grab-and-go bag, a bug-out bag, if your future disaster leaves you no other option but to flee to a safer area? Do you have a get-home bag or an everyday carry bag in your vehicle to get home when a sudden disaster strikes if you're on the road? When I was facing this recent tropical cyclone potential disaster, I had to critically look at my actual level of preparedness for such an event. And while I hadn't prepared specifically for this exact scenario, my preps fortunately overlapped well. And this is why I try to emphasize general preparedness on this community, on this channel, versus focusing on just one specific issue. I'm happy to say that my stuff was in order. I was glad to see. And I did find one issue though, which I'll discuss in a future video. It's so critical to test your gear. I pulled out a rain poncho from one of my bug out bags to wear in the storm on Sunday, and it started leaking within about 15 minutes of use. So guess what? I'm going to be going back and reevaluating some gear here pretty soon. But let me finish by saying this. Already, August looks to potentially set another round of records. If the trends continue, and there's absolutely no reason to think that they will not, next year's heat wave will likely be even worse as we shift even more into this El Nino weather cycle. Next year's heat domes will likely be even more intense and last even longer. Next year's storms will continue to shock us. Next year's records will continue to be set, even as centuries-old records fall. And as they say, the times, they are changing. If you're genuinely looking at just what has transpired in this decade, you're going to see where places where it looked like things were maybe going to turn for the better, but they have been followed by even more downturns and shocking events. Look, I'm not here to bang the drums of doom and gloom, but I'm here to tell you that it's important that you plug in solutions now with your eyes fully open to the fact that things are not business as usual. The world is changing, and we have to change with it. We must change what we do, how we prepare, and what we prepare for. That doesn't require us to reinvent the wheel if we've been prepping for even a little while, but it does require us to take a broader stance in a more expansive view of the range of calamities that could come our way. If you think your area is inching daily closer to a disaster that you previously considered unrealistic, I would encourage you to look at your preps and determine how you're equipped to make it through. You might want to go and watch our video on building an essential 90-day survival plan and understand how that's really what most of us need. Can you imagine if half your community had a 90-day food supply? Disasters would just be mere inconveniences. And I would encourage you as well to take the time to review our videos on building a bug out plan and building a bug out bag. Opportunity to just simply hunker down and stay put is, of course, the best option, but we're seeing disasters that have left people no choice but to get out as quickly as possible. We will witness these with greater frequency in the years ahead, and having a plan to stay put and a plan to get out are equally essential. Though nobody can really tell you with any certainty exactly what disasters you're going to face, we can't dismiss the fact that things are changing. Change is really becoming the only constant. And I would encourage you to take this calm before the next storm to review your plans and preps and factor in a broader range of disasters that you may not have considered before. Again, that was a wake-up call for me last weekend. You want to expand your scope and double down on your efforts while there's still time. If you have any thoughts, any comments, feel free to post those below. And as always, stay safe out there.